Wow, it's been a really interesting day. A lot of great sessions, good speakers, and very interesting content as well. Um, I'm actually really glad to have three distinguished panelists to be part of this discussion, Open by Design, Hiero, and the Future of Trust. For a minute, I just want to take time to introduce Mei Chen. Mei is the CEO of HashPack. Daniela Barbosa. Daniela is the Executive Director at Linux Foundation and Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust. And Richard, who you saw on the main stage earlier today, is the VP of Engineering for Hashgraph. So, as you may or may not know, Hedera is purely driven by open source code. While we have been open source since the beginning of Hedera, we formally donated the code to the Linux Foundation in 2024. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a history and background from Richard on, so we decided to open source 40 million lines of code to the Linux Foundation. I guarantee you the engineering team had something to say about it. So I would love to hear your story, your version of the story, how we went through it.
Yeah, it was actually a long journey. It's not something that you can just do overnight, of course, and technically, you know, this is a big part of it rests also with the governing council, because we needed to get approval from the governing council and the board at Hedera in order to open source the stuff. And we did our due diligence. We looked at a lot of different options. We looked at different foundations or starting our own foundation, but we really wanted to land on the Linux Foundation because the Linux Foundation has, it is like the gold standard for decentralized governance of open source code, really. And so it really fit our sort of ethos, what we needed to do. And so we had this great opportunity to work with Daniela and her team and bring all of our Hedera code to the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, which they were formerly Hyperledger and then rebranded as LFDT. So being able to come out at that time and contribute our code to there was really an honor, and I think, in retrospect, it was 1,000% the right move for us to make. It's been a fantastic experience being part of that group. But yeah, there's a lot of things that you have to do when you open source your code. It's not just like, hey, here's our code, thank you very much. We have to talk about how we do builds and tests and infrastructure and how we onboard new users. How do we get more people to participate and be part of this system? And I think that was one of the things that we were principally looking for in putting our code into a foundation, was something that was vendor neutral, so that the enterprises of the world could trust that we couldn't just take that code closed source at some point. It needed to have credible vendor neutrality, which Linux Foundation is top for that. And we also needed the ability to be able to attract developers to come and participate as part of our ecosystem. So that was also something that we were looking for and found with the Linux Foundation.
Well, I mean, it's been quite a journey. It's been 1.5 hours. I'll come back to you to ask more about this. But Daniela, welcome. You and I have known each other for more than 10 years, ever since I was at IBM and was part of the Hyperledger Foundation as it was getting set up. So Hyperledger Fabric, Hyperledger Besu, that's what the Hyperledger Foundation was famous for. Now, when Hiero and Hedera came to you to bring this code into it, what occurred with Linux Foundation? What did you have to go through in order for the code to be accepted and open to all the community? And also, I want to hear about what does graduation for a project actually mean?
And I'm going to go back a little bit further, just the audience here understands what the Linux Foundation is, and thank you, Richard, for the kind words, but we've proven to the marketplace and to the industry for many, many years that this is the case. So if you don't know the Linux Foundation, for over the 25 years, we've been the home to what I would say the most important open source project, which is the Linux kernel. And that's where we get our namesake at the Linux Foundation and our namesake at the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, which is a sub-umbrella at the Linux Foundation. Now, why do companies and organizations like Hedera bring their 40 million lines of code, all their developers and maintainers that continue to be maintainers and contributors to the project, and essentially IP that is very valuable in the market? Why would a company like that and others contribute to the Linux Foundation? If you think about wanting to have neutrality of the code, and also being able to work with your competitors in the same room, so the people that are going to build using your code bases. The Linux Foundation brings that. And I'll give you an example outside of our blockchain space, right? So in post-quantum cryptography, for example, Amazon, AWS has cryptography libraries, IBM has cryptography libraries, Google has cryptography libraries. They all want to contribute and work together on these things, but they cannot do it in the Google GitHub, right? It's not going to happen. So the neutrality of bringing code, whether it's in the agentic AI space, we have OpenAI working side by side with Anthropic and Block and others for those projects. And in the blockchain space, we have Hiero and other projects as well that is really collaborative. So about 3 years ago, I think, was the conversation started around Hedera wanting to open source. They did a lot of due diligence with other organizations as well. We had an established 7.5 years of blockchain-related projects at the Linux Foundation, projects that are being used in production by companies, for example, like you saw in the other stage before, right? DTCC and others, right? These big companies. And over again, what you hear, we actually have a great case study from Citi at Citi Token Services that really hits this, is when they're building, whether it's financial services or other industries, when you're building critical infrastructure, shared infrastructure, market infrastructure, that's for us, but is also for our children and their grandchildren, neutrality, code neutrality is very important. You have to have that neutrality. You need to be able to say, if we're not here anymore, maintainers will continue to do that, to maintain it from various companies. We hear that from governments, we hear that from everybody. So when, in September 2024, Hiero came in, it was fantastic. The amount of work that the Hedera ecosystem had to do was a lot. And over a year, they really worked towards getting into graduated status. So if you're not familiar with open source, there are project life cycles that these open source projects have to have. And when you go through the cycle from a lab to an incubated to a graduated project, not only do you get more services from us, but you also get to put a stamp in the marketplace that says, our code is truly open. It is neutral. There are multiple companies contributing to the code base, and it is essentially now an open source code that the Linux Foundation governs.
Thank you, Daniela. I'm going to pivot a little bit to enterprise adoption and retail adoption as well. So may HashPack, as a company that runs on Hiero infrastructure, right? What does this transition to open source mean for you and as well as the users?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been building the top wallet on Hedera since 2021, before LFDT came into play. And the good news is that this transition has been seamless for us. We basically just used, instead of using the Hedera code base, we now use the Hiero code base, and it's just been easy. Users haven't seen any change at all, which is fantastic. But that is just the retail users, the people who use the app. We also have another set of users, which is the businesses, the platforms that are building products on the network. And what is important to them, especially when we talk about enterprise, we talk about institutions and governments that are looking for networks that are going to exist for the next 5, 10, 20 years. They want to find projects that they can trust, that are going to persist, that are vendor neutral, that won't lock them in, that have clear paths to collaboration and to contribution. And LFDT hits all of those check marks, right? So these projects are, these companies, these institutions can come in, they can contribute to the code base, they can collaborate with others, they can even fork it if they need to. If they absolutely need to, they can do that, and they can continue to run their business and not be beholden to some single vendor's roadmap if it doesn't agree with what they're doing. And this is super important. And what does that mean for businesses like HashPack that serve these projects to our products to our users? It means that we have access to assets that don't exist anywhere else. And that is very exciting for us. So this is absolutely fantastic for us, and we've been honestly looking forward to it for a long time because it's always been in the Hedera roadmap.
Well, that is cool. I mean, we are thrilled to have you as part of our Hiero governance, and especially on the TSC. So her contribution, her team's contribution is directly reflected in the Hiero code base, so that's cool. So I did not pay them. They said this themselves, vendor neutral, vendor neutral, vendor neutral. So I want to dig a little bit more into it. So Daniela, why is vendor neutral so important for enterprises, and especially their procurement teams? And you know, we have gone through this motion of closed code bases versus open source, and why is one better than the other in a framework of how does organizations actually make money out of this?
Yeah. And there's actually multiple types of open source, right? And I think especially in the decentralized space, the Web3 space, blockchain space, whatever you're going to call it, open source has won. But there's also open source that's openly governed and openly developed, right? Which is where you get that neutrality, right? And then when you have it in a neutral foundation, like the Linux Foundation, which is not in a Web3 Labs Foundation, for example, right? That it has that is basically part of the treasury and the governance. So it's really important to understand when, let's say, the Central Bank of France, the Banque de France, right, or any of the other central banks, or when Citi, I mentioned before, Citi Services, when they're making a selection, they are working with vendors in the space, right? They have their set vendors that they want to work with, but they want to also make sure that they don't, if they need to move away from that vendor, that they can, right? And what that means is, and this is one of the pillars of what the Linux Foundation does, is building that healthy commercial ecosystem, right? So that you can say, you know what, we're building the best wallet in the space, but if somebody wanted to build another one, we welcome them. We want them there because diversity is important as well. So what we hear over and over again from the institutions is that they want that kind of optionality, the long-term optionality to work with others. But they want to make sure that they are also working very closely and collaborating. This is where we can convene competitors in the same room. We can convene customers and partners in the room with the maintainers so they can hear directly from the marketplace and the industry what they want as well. So by doing that, Hedera has been able to get people in the room that normally you would not be able to, right? They wouldn't be like, well, we're not your customer, or we're not sure we want to use the Hedera network as well. So I think that that neutrality and that long-term vision of we can't be the only ones in the room is how open source wins.
Well, look, Richard, I told you I'll come back to you on this. You said Hiero is more than just open source, and it's about community and building a community and bringing them all together. So help me a little bit understand more now that Hiero has graduated. What is the plans with the community for 2026, and where are we going with the direction and roadmap?
Yes, there's a. So one of the first things that we did when we came was we established the technical steering committee, which you mentioned earlier, the TSC, which, by the way, we have our meetings are all open. They're recorded. You can join them. You don't have to be a member of the TSC to join that meeting. Anybody can join it, and they can, follow in and even, pitch in. Hendrik, who's up here in the front, runs that. He's the chairman on that meeting, and he will, gladly take input from anybody. So there's, we really tried to open up this decision making. Every single specification change that we have for any of the code that ends up landing on Hedera, all of it goes through the TSC. It's truly run by that community. And we also, when we established that technical steering committee, we made sure that we did it in a way where we truly added people who were already longtime members of the Hedera community, but were not part of Hashgraph or Hedera itself, so that we would get truly an opportunity for people to voice their opinions and to be able to participate in that system. And we were trying to set that tone from the beginning, that this is really what we're doing. It's not just like token open source. I think a lot of people do a token open source. I've participated in token open source in previous roles. But this one was like not intended to be that, but to be done the right way, where it's, again, vendor neutral, some place where we all come together as a community. So some of the things that we're doing this year, for example, there's like a mentorship program to try to get new people who are entering into the space. One of our most active contributor-led pieces of the system are the Python SDKs, and the SDKs have started to take that same blueprint and apply it to all the other SDKs and kind of get more of those contributions in the SDK part. So there's a lot of work going on there. And of course, we have been going to various different meetups and meetings to be able to work with people. And we want to continue to move more of that, make more of the development easy to follow, easy to participate in. We're working on a public roadmap page in GitHub, basically, so that you'll be able to see exactly all the different epics and everything that we're working on, and just kind of, all the information is there. It's just you got to dig for it. So we want to make it easier for people to be able to run into these things and figure out what we're doing.
Well, if you have never been on a TSC meeting or dialed in, it can get very spicy. So I encourage you to get some popcorn and listen in.
And that's the same against all communities.
No, we are extra spicy. So, look, I'm going to ask May, from your point of view, the market is shifting, technologies are changing, AI is driving a lot of, doing the code writing, but also the idea of that AI agents are going to need wallets, and dApp application developers are essentially expecting that integration by default into these kind of wallets. So what's your position? How does Hiero and the open source element come into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Agentic economy is a huge topic right now, and I get questions all the time. Are you guys going to build an agentic wallet, and how are you going to get agent-to-agent transactions and asset transfers and those kind of things? And that's top of mind for everybody. But I think that what we really need right now, before that can even happen at scale, is a foundation of AI infrastructure that enables that to happen, because we don't have that yet. And what I'm talking about is things like verification, agent identity, and data authenticity. These kind of things, you need to have some kind of standards that define this and that people can build to, so that you can trust what the agents are doing, and you can make sure that things are happening and you don't just delete your entire code base in one go because you left it running overnight, right? And one of the projects that is building on Hiero right now, under the Hiero umbrella, is HOL, and they have done a lot of stuff in this exact space, and they are a consortium of 30 companies that have come together to build on these standards and to contribute and to collaborate on this, and they're solving real problems right now. And I just want to say one of the companies here is GoDaddy. They are one of the biggest DNS companies in America, and they are building directly on HOL and contributing standards and building their agentic identity infrastructure layer off of these standards. And why are they doing it with Hiero? Is because you have that neutral enterprise-grade governance that allows them to collaborate and to contribute all as an ecosystem. And you get rid of that idea that if you are building in this space, you have to work with GoDaddy. No, you're building on a neutral repository of standards that everybody can build to, and that is where they're seeing the benefit here. And that can only happen on Hiero with this kind of LFDT structure. So, if that's just like a really real example. I think they just announced it this week of what they're doing, and so that is, I think that this has to be solved, and it's being solved on Hiero, and when that happens, we can easily build out the rest of the pieces.
Well, I mean, holonline.com, good plugin. I think it's really cool that GoDaddy is building on top of it. Another project that's on the Hiero, which is recently got approved our sub-project is Heka. Heka is an identity platform that's built on Hiero, and it was recently bought in. The code was bought into Hiero. The TSC approved it. Richard, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because May talked about agent identity, and identity is important. And what's the connection? How do we use it?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of standards that have been in development for years and years in this space. You'll find them in Hiero as DIDs, or decentralized identities. And Heka is like bringing all those DIDs and other things together for this sort of agentic world. And what's really interesting about both Project Heka and the HOL standards and the GoDaddy, none of those things would have been happening if it was just the Hashgraph team writing code, right? These things are happening because other people are getting involved in this ecosystem, and it's far beyond what we ever would have done on our own. And so I think that's the real value that we see in these sort of things. So whether it's the agentic work that's being done by Heka or by the HOL, it's like all being driven by other people who are coming and saying, hey, we want to be part of this. Can we bring our project here? And can we be participants in this? It's like, yeah, for sure, that's what we want.
Very appropriate. So, Daniela, for you, look, when we started out on this journey, Hiero bought its code base in. We were the first layer one to bring our code base into the Linux Foundation. But since then, Midnight has come in, and now we just, 2 days ago, we announced Linnea, it's coming in. Wow. Can you talk a little bit about the value of all these different layer ones or layer twos coming into LFDT, the collaboration, and also the cross-pollination, especially with respect to roadmaps and usabilities, and also cross-pollination with projects outside of LFDT in the Linux Foundation as well.
Yeah, and we see that already, which was another natural fit for Hiero because of Bezu, Bezu as part of the consensus that you use on the Hedera side. So what we see is, Hiero was the first, so Hedera was the first to bring their code into a neutral foundation, which means that it didn't spin up a new foundation or put it under their foundation. They actually gave everything to the Linux Foundation and established a project with a technical steering committee that governs that project. I can actually not tell the maintainers what to do. I would love, I always say they're the kings and queens of their projects. We got a king right here. Sometimes I would love to say, hey, you guys should really do this. And that's really, really important when the decision points are being made. Is like, hey, we can work collaboratively on interoperability. So, for example, very exciting to hear about Clipper, and there are things within the communities that everyone's going to want to contribute to. Like, we want to be part of this. So when 2 years ago, when we expanded what was then known as the Hyperledger Foundation to Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, it was exactly, and the Hedera ecosystem were the first ones we were talking to, exactly to bring that umbrella structure where you can have competing layer ones and competing layer twos and permission DLT, that's not going to go anywhere, actually in the same umbrella, where you inherit the same governance, open governance principles, you inherit the same open source security practices. And so, I say this all the time. It used to be like, Shyam, you would know this, like no one gets fired for buying IBM, right? Or nobody gets fired for, right now, no one gets fired for buying Anthropic, right? No one gets fired for choosing an open source, a well-adopted, growing ecosystem of open source, because you realize that you can have multiple vendors to go work with and partners. So I think it's been really a fantastic journey, and big kudos to the maintainers and the contributors and the TSC, and very importantly the Hedera Council and the management at Hashgraph as well for really putting in the hard work and the investment. It's a big investment for it, and I think the marketplace sees that. And so other projects want to come in because they want to work next to Hiero, right? We have projects that are coming in as sub-projects. You have identity projects that want to collaborate. So we have under Trust over IP, we have the Trust Working Group. Like a lot of these projects want to work with Hiero now because it's an established place to do so. So you're going to see more of that growth, especially as a lot of these systems start moving into production, and they need, what I would say, real grown-ups in the room supporting the work that, the code and the development that they need to do.
Okay, so we got 3 minutes and quick questions for you. There is a CTO in this room that's on the fence about adopting Hiero-based, open source for their enterprise. What would you want them to walk away with? Each one of you. Why don't we start with you? Hey.
Sure. I think that just having a look at the TSC meetings or looking into the different projects that are being built on Hedera or on Hiero, and seeing where you can fit in or where you can collaborate or contribute into the code base. I think that that is very powerful, something that doesn't exist in other networks. And if you just take a look at, say, for example, HL.org, and just see what is being built there and what companies are being built there, perhaps there is a collaboration that is very exciting for you.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest CTOs in the biggest companies, both technology companies, financial services, pharmaceuticals, airlines, they realize that open source is critical and important. And many of these organizations have open source strategy offices, for example, where they have teams of people that look at open source, that look at the software coming in, and you can't buy a piece of software without it going through a compliance check and a regulatory check. And very often that checklist has, is this code base of the product that you're buying, right? You're probably working with a vendor, right? Is this code base open sourced? Is this going to be something that is going to be neutrally managed for the time being? So if you're CTO and you are interested in learning more about open source, whether it's Hiero or other open source projects, the Linux Foundation has great resources for people to also understand, small companies, big companies, state regulators, governments, why open source and how open source to use it in your system, in your infrastructure, and why it's not scary, and why together we actually scale much faster in these technologies. And this is what we're seeing across the board: is you don't have time to sit around and just pick one vendor and throw the dice and say, hey, is this going to work out? Really come into the community, start participating, start contributing. There is a place for you, even if you might not think there is. There's a place for you to come and learn and contribute as well.
All right, you guys had such great answers. I don't have much to add, but I would say that if you're a CTO and you've never done anything with the Linux Foundation before with open source, that what you can get is confidence. You have complete confidence that the code is never going to be taken away from you because it's run by an independent entity. You can have confidence that there will be a community there to participate with. You'll have confidence that you can participate as an equal partner in that community. Those are really the values that come from having an open foundation. That's why we did this in the first place, was so that people would have that confidence.
No better line to close that on. So thank you, Richard, Daniela, and May. This was Open Source on Hiero. Thank you very much.